Warning, the contents of this video are mature and can be very upsetting to some people. Viewer discretion is advised. The year is 1456. The son of the Voivode of Wallachia has just exited exile and with the help of the Hungarian military invaded his homeland of Wallachia. What followed would cement him in history as a ruthless, demented ruler, and over 400 years later we would see his likeness inspire the most famous vampire character to date. This man was Vlad Tepes, better known as Vlad the Impaler. Now, Vladdy Boy lived through an insane amount of pain, being held captive at a young age, living through an invasion, surviving the murder of his family, being sent to Hungarian prison, but also taking control of Wallachia 3 times. He wasn't a very good guy, but to this day he's still considered a national hero in Romania, so I guess the guy must have done something right. Now you may be asking yourself, Professor Six, what does this random Wallachian guy have to do with the Fallout universe? Well, my irradiated pupil, let me tell you. Vlad had an obsession. Those he captured in combat were brought before him. He would impale them on large wooden stakes, and I won't explain any more about the process because then I will never see a cent of advertiser money ever again. Just look it up. It's pretty gross. Anyways, in the end, Vlad was responsible for the deaths of anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 people, many of them at the stake. There are also reports that he would drink his victims' blood, but these remain historically unconfirmed. In 1897, Bram Stoker would publish a book called Dracula, with the main character being heavily implied to be Vlad, having his name be a literal reference to Vlad's family name Dracul. It is the first mainstream depiction of a vampire and has inspired the likes of media such as Nosferatu, Interview with the Vampire, and everyone's favorite franchise, Twilight. Vlad Tepes was seen as a monster walking in human skin. Many of the original monsters that have inspired creepy creatures today have Vlad to thank, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Fallout is notorious for having some of the coolest but also creepiest monsters in games, so in this video I will be going through every mainstream Fallout game and discussing the top 3 scariest creatures in them. Keep in mind this is subjective, so something I may find creepy may not be creepy to you. If you think of any other creatures or people that you think are terrifying, put them down in the comments. Just keep in mind, when you really look into it, the scariest beings in Fallout aren't the creatures, they're the humans. The floater is a creature that appears in multiple games, but I feel the floater from Fallout 1 takes the cake for the scariest variant. Found on the West Coast, we don't have total confirmation of what these creatures originated from, but the current leading theory is that they formed from simple flatworms. We don't know much about the West Coast variants, but in an interview being questioned about the floaters in Fallout 76, Bethesda designer Ferret Baudouin, I don't know, can be quoted saying, yes, they are the same floaters from before. FEV research was being done both in Appalachia and the West Coast. This reveals that the Fallout 1 floaters are FEV mutants, making them related to creatures such as super mutants and centaurs. In California, they were utilized as a sort of attack dog for the Unity. They would accompany super mutant patrols and frequently move in packs. Their appearance in Fallout 1 is akin to a worm standing on its lower half. The top of its head is open with a toothy maw agape waiting for its prey. Inside the mouth is a long, flowering tongue that can be shot out to perform an almost drill-like attack. On the underside of its head, we see what looks to be dripping skin. Fun fact, while in development, the floater was called the Sphincter Monster, and some game files are still named that. The thing is just plain nasty, but not nearly as terrifying as some other creatures on this list. Look y'all, the first game didn't give me a lot to work with on this list other than the next one, but the more I looked into this thing, the more I felt genuinely creeped out. The pig rat is an animal that is described as smaller than a giant rat but larger than a mole rat. It's a hairless burrowing rodent with 3 large claws protruding from each paw. Its head resembles a rat but with the snout of a hog. It has the quote deviousness of a rat with the insatiable greedy appetite of a pig. They attack both with claws as well as their teeth and transfer a good amount of radiation to its victims. It's currently unknown if they're a hybrid of a rat and a hog or a brand new creature in the Wasteland. Some travel in packs, others hunt alone, but they are fast either way. When I was writing out the creatures for this list, I remembered this thing and really studied its attack animations and stuff. I don't know if it's just the body horror or maybe just trying to envision it in my mind, but something about this thing gives me the biggest ick. The Master is known by many names: the Holy Flame, the Dark God, Father Hope, but before all of this he was known as Richard Moreau. Born before the Great War, very little is known about his life before the bombs dropped. The earliest we learn of his history is in 2092, a small amount of time after Vault 8 opened its door. Richard was exiled for murder, choosing to head over 400 miles south, settling in the Hub. Here he established himself as a doctor, changing his last name from Moreau to Gray. He became quite popular and could have led a very fulfilling life had he not decided to investigate the supermutant attacks that were ravaging the hub's caravans. Richard elected to join Harold, a local merchant at the time, and took leadership of an expedition out to find the resources of the mutations and end them once for all. They left in 2102, heading northeast, traveling for a while before discovering Mariposa military base. Inside they found hordes of supermutants. Many of the expeditionary team died fighting their way into the base, and in the end only Richard and Harold remained to discover the evil secret within. Deep in the base, a large room full of FEV vats was housed, and upon discovery, a robot crane crashed onto them. Harold was knocked out, and Richard was thrown into a vat of FEV. He floated in the vat for days, nearly drowning multiple times. After he was able to pull himself out, he continued to mutate. As he stabilized, he realized that his mental capacity was greatly increased, allowing him to resolve incredibly complex philosophical questions. Before long, he began experimenting on animals, exposing them to the FEV. After an experiment where he dipped a rat and a dog into the vat at the same time, creating a fusion of the two, he formulated the idea of unification. He would eventually run out of test subjects, choosing to start experimenting more on himself, eventually gaining some psychic abilities. The first ability he obtained was the ability to neurologically link with computers, giving him access to the entire military base's databanks. Using this newly uncovered data, he would accelerate his experiments, now choosing to perform them on unfortunate travelers unlucky enough to stumble into the base. After many attempts, he would finally find success, creating the first intelligent supermutant, the first of the Unity. Over the next 30 years, he would steadily build up his numbers. In 2131, he began targeting caravans to get more test subjects, the original thing he embarked out to stop. Within 6 years, he had assimilated enough mutants to begin mass production, finding a success rate between 15% and 20%. In the next 15 years, the Unity would spread all throughout New California. In 2152, the Master enlisted the children of the Cathedral to act as his eyes and ears in the populated areas of New California, receiving information as well as more numbers to add to his ranks. Shortly after, he would discover the Los Angeles Vault and transfer his command and disgustingly twisted body into it, having the children of the Cathedral renovate the building above to provide cover and security. This building would become known as the Cathedral. A little while later, the Master would encounter the Vault Dweller, who would then infiltrate the Cathedral and destroy it with a nuclear weapon. This is where the Master died. By the end of his story, the Master was an amalgam of flesh. The original head of Richard Gray can be seen resting atop a terminal, with an enlarged eye shooting off of his right side. He has multiple bloody, fleshy tendrils spreading away from him, covering the floors, walls, and ceilings of his vault. Multiple wires are connected not only to his terminal, but his flesh itself. When he speaks, 4 voices can be heard, 1 robotic, 2 male, and 1 female, furthering the idea of his unity. A genius, a psychic, a monster, all destroyed by one man from a vault similar to his own. The Master is truly the creepiest thing in Fallout 1. The Centaur was another FEV experiment conducted by the Master, and by Fallout 2 they have learned to survive on their own in the Wasteland. They were originally created in Mariposa military base by tossing a mixture of humans, dogs, and other animals into the vats. Due to the various mixtures being tossed, the Centaurs can vary in physical appearances, but they are all somewhat humanoid in appearance. The wiki states they are approximately the size of a small bear, with a f***ed up torso and 6 arms that act as legs. Fleshy moving tentacles can be seen growing from their undersides, attempting to feel whatever is on the ground beneath them. Growing from their torso are 2 long misshapen necks and 2 heads rest upon them, 1 canine in nature and 1 human. Most of the canine heads can be seen with a spiked collar sitting beneath them. It also appears that both heads are capable of thought, as we can see the canine head snapping at the human on multiple occasions. Those who aren't alone in the Wasteland can be seen roaming with packs of remnant Unity members in Fallout 2, also accompanied by floaters. A disgusting dog for a disgusting faction. It is unknown what creature the Wanamingo evolved from. Although the Fallout Bible is no longer canon, they are mentioned in it. The Bible explains that they were results of a pre-war FEV experiment, created to make creatures that could follow orders and be deployed into enemy territory. Fallout Bible also describes their genetic dead man switch, placed in them to prevent them from excessive breeding. Their genetic clock would stop around 2246 or earlier for older generations. The first place they were confirmed to be nesting was the mining town of Redding, where they were found in vast numbers deep in the Great Wanamingo mine, hence where they got their name. This was the richest mine in the town, and it was shut down after enslaved laborers refused to fight them. Instead, they opted to flee and blew up the dynamite stores located in the mine, trapping the creatures in their nest. Some creatures of Redding believed them to be from another world, referring to them as aliens, whereas others believed they were supernatural creatures summoned by the natives in California to punish the white people for the Great War. They weren't known to be smart, but they were known to be very strong and impervious to gunfire. They are covered in slime and have no eyes or neck. Instead, they are simply a large mouth with razor-sharp teeth with a rounded back. They have large tentacles that they use to capture prey, lined with suckers. They are roughly the size of a cow and notoriously smell dreadful. They move around on thin legs with 3-toed feet and sharp claws. Their appearance is most likely a reference to the xenomorphs from H.R. Geiger's Aliens franchise, with added proof to this with people referring to them directly as aliens. In Fallout 2, there's a running joke in game that the Chosen One cannot actually spell Wanamingo, instead referring to them as Wanamingo and Whatchamacallit. Necessary humor for an otherwise freaky looking motherfucker. This one isn't much as creepy as it is just genuinely scary. Frank Horrigan is the final boss in Fallout 2. Born in 2211, Frank was considered a huge brick of a man. He was originally the personal bodyguard of then Enclave President Dick Richardson. Motherfucker, wait, this guy's name was Dick Richardson? Dick Dixon? Dude was named Dick, son of Dick. After an undocumented psychotic episode, he was reassigned to patrol duty. During one of his patrols, he discovered the Mariposa military base and was subject to the forced evolutionary virus. He began mutating into a super mutant, prompting the Enclave to send him to their oil rig to be studied. For the next 2 years, Frankie would be studied and operated on as he gradually turned more and more into a mutant. He was heavily sedated for most of his time on the rig, becoming incredibly violent when he was conscious. By the end of his transformation, the men under his control considered him more of a machine than a man. The Enclave engineered a custom suit of power armor for him, as well as a hardened composite blade for close combat and a prototype plasma gun. They also reinforced their control over him, running conditioning programs on him, taking advantage of his lowered intelligence. He was now even bigger, faster, and stronger than he already was, with a suit of power armor that continuously injected him with drugs and other stabilizers, keeping him alive. They armed him with a number of cybernetic enhancements and sent him back into the field, although few were willing to accompany him. The actions he performed in the field were said to give Enclave soldiers terrible nightmares. In 2242, Frank would meet his demise at the hands of the Chosen One. After a long, strenuous fight, Frank would be mortally wounded, causing him to be bisected at his waist. His last words were him reciting his oath to the Enclave, followed by the explosion of his head due to pressure buildup. This freak of nature ripped a Deathclaw apart with his own hands, slaughtered entire civilizations, and remained loyal to the bitter end. There is truly nothing scarier. After the bombs dropped, Vault 101 began working on their prime experiment, the cloning of a single man repetitively. The vault was purposely left empty, with the hopes that the clones would fill the different roles needed to keep the vault running. His name was Gary, and he was a pretty normal guy. However, as they began cloning, they realized that each clone of Gary was becoming more and more hostile. By Gary 53, the staff began to worry about what to do with all the clones. Shortly after this, Gare Bear 54 would injure one of the researchers, one Dr. Peterson. Their plan was to begin the destruction of the previous Garys to work on more tests, but by the time the Lone Wanderer arrives in the vault, we see that the scientists are all dead and only the Garys remain. These clones look like normal adult males. What makes them creepy is their vocabulary. Each of the surviving Garys in the vault only speak one word, and that is their name.
Gary? 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 Ah, Gary. Ha ha ha, Gary!
What the f is that, dude? One man, cloned against his will, watching each rendition becoming increasingly more violent and incapable of any speech other than the word Gary. Walking around old vaults has always been a little unsettling, but imagine this. It's silent. You're deep underground in a poorly lit hallway. Suddenly, quietly echoing behind you, you hear one word.
Gary.
Brother, I would hope I wore my brown pants that day. The story of Vault 108 is, like most vault stories, tragic. At least the original Gary died before the Lone Wanderer found the vault. I'm sure it would be traumatic to watch yourself die multiple times before dying yourself. Now listen, I'm very aware I already covered centaurs, but the East Coast variant is, in my opinion, a million times creepier than the West Coast. This may be due to the fact that you can actually see them in first person, but that's besides the point. Much like the West Coast version, the East Coast is a result of FEV experimentation. They are almost as tall as an adult human, but they lack arms on their torsos. Protruding from their mouths are long, slimy tentacles. It has multiple bones poking out of its body and an amalgam of teeth growing out of its chest. Instead of walking, this version of the centaur drags itself along the ground with 6 twisted arms. Despite not having ears or eyes, the East Coast centaur has a very high perception. According to terminal entries by Moira Brown, it's also hypothesized that due to their abundance of tongues that they have the ability to speak, although it's never heard in game. Unlike their West Coast counterpart, these centaurs only have one human head, lacking the canine aspect of the creature. They're often seen accompanying super mutants, but they can also be seen moving across the wasteland in packs. They honestly remind me of the ending of the horror movie Tusk, when Justin Long's character is discovered to have been converted into a human walrus and shit. Look at the picture above and tell me you don't see it. Seeing as Tusk is one of the only body horror movies that has genuinely freaked me out, I feel that the Capital Wasteland Centaurs earned their spot on this list. In 2277, the Lone Wanderer is abducted by an alien race known as the Zetans, being held captive on their UFO. Here they meet the creatures known as the Abominations. Located in the biological research wing of Mothership Zeta, the Abominations are a cursed crossbreed between the Zetans and the humans. Logs in the ship tell us that the aliens have attempted to create these creatures multiple times, but not all humans survive. Their sole purpose is to kill, being hostile against both humans and aliens. They're about as tall as an adult male, have freakish strength, and cannot be knocked down. They are incapable of speech, and upon seeing an intruder, they will point and wail at them before rapidly moving towards them in an attempt to slaughter them. The pointing and wailing are a reference to one of my favorite movies of all time, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring Donald Sutherland, one of my favorite actors, rest in peace. In the movie, we see the human race slowly being taken over and replaced by an unknown entity, later revealed to be aliens. The aliens are emotionless, and when they discover someone who is not one of their own, they point and shriek just like the Abominations. Back to the Zetans, they have semi-transparent skin, pitch black eyes, and abnormally long arms. Makes me wonder if the original human is still somewhere inside that terrifying chimera body, incapable of letting anyone know, only being able to scream. The Spore Carriers are reanimated humans taken over by an entomopathogenic fungus. Originating from Vault 22, the Spore Carriers were never actually meant to exist. The vault was designed as a green vault, with the purpose of studying plant life and crop expansion. One of these studies was on Bovaria mordicana, a fungus that was made for pest control. Upon beginning their studies, however, the fungus became airborne. Spores would rapidly spread throughout the vault, infecting most of the humans. First to die was Dr. Harrison Peters. His death absolutely shocked the other scientists, causing them to rapidly contain those infected. When someone is exposed to the fungus, it begins slowly taking them over from the inside. They learned that those infected die within 10 to 20 days, but the virus does not die. In response to it all, the scientists filled the lower levels of the vault with the gas, anticipating to blow it up, killing the virus, but also everyone infected. However, not wanting to die, the infected fought back. By the time the courier enters the vault, all that remains are the reanimated corpses of those infected with the spores. They appear as humanoids crouched down, walking on all four limbs. Their eyes are consumed by the fungus that has taken over their entire body, giving them a green color that they use to camouflage in with the surrounding greenery. Growing out of their backs are jagged growths of the fungus. Their hands and their feet have 4 fingers and 4 toes each. These creatures were once poor scientists just hoping to help preserve wildlife in the midst of nuclear hell. Now, even in death, they are mindless hosts for a fungus that keeps them alive and in constant pain. The Big MT has some pretty messed up experiments housed in it, but the one that I feel is the most disturbing is the Y-17 Master Trauma Harness. Designed in the Y-17 medical facility, the harness was created with casualty recovery in mind. It would keep track of the user's vitals, taking over motor functions of the wearer should they meet a certain threshold. The idea was that the suit would take the strain off of its wearer, walking them back to their home base and more. Despite what it would become, it was a medical and technological marvel. However, they never got to see combat. See, they were still prototypes, and many issues arose that were not fixed. If a home base wasn't set, the suit would enter a wander mode, just kind of walking around at random. It was not able to detect whether its user was alive or not. It was also able to replicate its user's combat techniques, such as shooting and reflexes, but it had no IFF software, meaning it couldn't determine who was friend and who was foe. As the wiki says, the suits acted more as mobile coffins. People testing the suits had no way to shut them down, resulting in a slow and painful death. 2 centuries later, the suits can still be found roaming around the Big Empty, with the decomposed remains of its wearers still visible in them. Genuinely a demise I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, being forced to starve to death while your body is commandeered by the clothes you're wearing, killing your friends. Cannot stop it, all you can do is watch as they die. Listen, you know death calls were going to appear somewhere on this list. I could see no better place for them to show up than in the New Vegas list. Just hearing the words Quarry Junction sends me into a PTSD-riddled episode. The death claw was actually created before the Great War by the US government. It was meant as a cost-efficient replacement for ground troops in combat operations. They are descendant of the Jackson's chameleon and other animal genetics. The project was an astounding success, but we have no actual record of them ever being deployed in combat. Upon surviving the Great War, the death claws were able to escape captivity, quickly spreading across the United States. They are a bipedal species created to kill with the utmost lethality. Their bipedal nature allows them a greater field of vision, improving their ability to track hostiles. It also allows their claws to be utilized as lethal weapons, having opposable thumbs and incredibly sharp talons. They have also been seen running on all fours to chase prey, increasing their speed. It has an insane amount of strength and resilience to most attacks. They're commonly seen with brown skin, acting as a natural camouflage, and curved horns used for goring. They also tend to move in packs, exponentially raising their lethality. I felt if death claws were to show up anywhere on this list, it would either be in Fallout 3 or New Vegas. The mixture of speed that was much faster than the player character, as well as their bullet sponge nature, truly makes them a force to be reckoned with in these games. Not to say they aren't serious threats in other games, but specifically in Fallout 4 and 76, they feel much easier to kill and much less of a threat. All in all, the Deathclaws are a genetically modified apex predator made with the express purpose of killing humans. terrifying. Have you ever heard someone talking about how a cockroach can survive a nuclear bomb? Well, apparently in Fallout they can. The rat roach is a giant version of the measly cockroach, often being found underground in tunnels and sewers. Due to this, they are considered a pest in vaults across the nation. They live in fairly large groups, feeding on the dead but not being opposed to using their numbers to take down larger prey, even targeting humans. They're commonly found in dark, damp places and are incredibly territorial. Roughly the size of a cat, the rat roach grew a large thorax for protection, longer antennae, and incisors of steel to kill and inject prey. Although they do have wings, they are not able to fly. They also have a venomous spit that they can use to attack enemies at range. I hate cockroaches. The way they move is too smooth and feels unnatural to me. They hide in the dark crevices and cracks in a home, and quite honestly, you truly don't know how many can be in your walls unless you break them down. Who knows? You could have hundreds right next to you, scurrying around and growing bigger, only separated by a single layer of drywall. Edgar Swan was a simple janitor working at the Institute. After stealing a pack of cigarettes, Edgar would be arrested, being offered a very interesting probation deal. All he had to do was live in isolation for a month, writing daily in a journal, and he would be free. Unknown to him, he was actually infected with the forced evolutionary virus, making his probation a ruse for scientists to study the effects it has on humans. After 6 days, Swan began to suspect something. His body ached, his mind was racing, and he was losing his ability to write. He knew they had done something to him, he just didn't know what. After 2 weeks, Edgar stabilized. His muscle mass increased 3 times what it was, and he also saw a major increase in his intelligence. This is when he was informed what the FEV was and what it entailed, exciting him and causing him to sign up to the research team to continue his own experiment. Around week 3, Strong noticed his mental capacity failing again. They learned that his strain of FEV was unstable, and from then on his health would rapidly deteriorate. Soon after, the Institute would cut their losses and abandon him in the ruins of Boston, with him eventually making his way to Boston Common, a destroyed park. He made a home there in the groundkeeper's shack and continued writing his journal. After more time, Swan finally lost his mind and transformed into a super mutant, and by 2287 he grew from a mutant into a behemoth. He could only shout his name, and he made himself some sense of armor out of an old swan boat. He carries a large boat anchor in one hand and uses the pointed tip of a boat in the other, both being lethal weapons in his hands. Edgar Swan's story is a tragic one, and being able to read through his journal entries, watching a man slowly lose all semblance of himself is a bone-chilling experience. Bright pink ghouls don't necessarily seem scary, that is until you learn the story behind them. Suffolk County Charter School was a simple school before the war, but they did not have a good amount of funding. Before the Great War occurred, they were approached with a deal from the US government. They would receive extra amounts of funding, but in exchange they would be required to serve the children of the school an experimental nutritionary agent called food paste. It was a pink goop and it is said to be devoid of flavor, although the notes read in the terminals claim that it tastes great. Any outside food was confiscated from the school, and it didn't take long for the paste to take action. Within the first week of consumption, students began acting erratically and started to have a pink hue in their complexion. By the time we see the high school in game, there is still food paste in the school, perfectly preserved. However, the terrifying part is that it's protected by a number of feral ghouls. Feral ghouls with pink complexions. These ghouls look no different to the normal feral ghouls you can find in the Commonwealth, but now knowing the story of the school, the player quickly learns that these ghouls are not just any ghouls, they are the students of the school. The teenagers who were fed this pink sludge against their will. The realization that these kids did not get the opportunity to survive, instead becoming mindless zombies damned to roam their old school, made me have a verbal reaction. A genuine oh shit moment. Having grown up in Ohio, I know a good amount about ticks. These little pricks are arachnids, meaning they're closely related to spiders. They stick on your skin and suck your blood like little bloated vampires, and they suck. Enter the giant tick. They evolved from the, Ixides scapularis, colloquially known as the deer tick. They are freakishly fast and make a really freaky skittering noise when they move. Their back is equipped with a blood sac, which they can use to spray blood at potential prey. Oh yeah, and if you kill the little freaks while they have a full blood sac, they'll fucking explode into a volley of warm irradiated blood. They also have a chance of transferring the parasite disease to the player. I'm keeping this one short and sweet to spare myself from having to talk about these absolute monsters any longer. My skin is just itching thinking about them. Next creature, please. Now what could be worse than giant ticks? How about an unidentified eldritch horror? Found in the Lucky Hole Mine, the Interloper, or the Firstborn of the Wood, is a large creature worshipped by the followers of the Winged One, the cult of Mothman. Before the war, a strange elderly woman visited the mine, being turned away after asking for a tour. Very soon after, the mine's parent corporation ordered the mine to stop operating indefinitely. The woman then returned with a group of people, again asking for a tour. They were denied again, but were then spotted stalking the entrance. The security team would then eventually flee the mine, giving it over to the group. They would survive the Great War by taking refuge here. Sometime later, a Mothman cultist named Jeff Lane would record what he called a false memory regarding a being he called the Creature. He said the being was, quote, made real deep underground. It is recorded that many supernatural events occurred as the cultists inhabited the mine. These include the formation of a dark spring that the cultists drank from and blood seeping from the Interloper's branches. By 2102, the cultists would either die out or leave the state due to the increasing danger of the Scourge Plague, but would return in 2103. This is where we find them in-game. The Interloper is a large plant-like creature with skin resembling bark. It has many tangled branches and a pair of twisted legs. It also appears to have a somewhat misshapen human torso and several hands growing from its head and back. Where the branches connect resembles a sort of mouth. In its chamber you can find sculptures of faces, the same sculptures found in Dunwich Borers, furthering the theory that the Interloper is in fact an eldritch god of some kind. I love this Lovecraftian style writing, and seeing Bethesda keep up their eldritch horror in 76 was a very welcome surprise. Still, the thing inflicts fear into anyone unfortunate enough to encounter it. I'm going to let you in on a little secret for this one. I made this entire video to talk about the Wendigo Colossus. Legend says that a Wendigo is formed from a human that has performed the heinous act of cannibalism. It is theorized that due to the radiation of the Great War, the mutation of the Wendigo was allowed to happen, explaining why they didn't see Wendigos pre-war. However, anyone who's been to West Virginia can tell you that this may not have been the case. Legend of the Wendigo has been around for centuries, originating from the Algonquin tribe. To this day, people in real life believe that the Wendigo is real, with many claiming to have witnessed them. I also adhere to the belief that they're real, stalking the Appalachian Mountains. Many recorded cases of mental deterioration prior to the transformation have been found, although it is currently unknown the benchmarks needed for the mutation to occur. There are also theories that they may be a subcategory of feral ghouls. The Wendigo Colossus is a version of the normal Wendigo that is much larger and much stronger. Although not as fast as the original Wendigo, it is leagues taller, with 2 additional heads and long, disproportionate limbs. It has glowing, beady orange eyes and sharp fangs in its mouth. Atop its head, you can still see the hair from the person it was before its transformation. This is, in my opinion, not just the scariest creature in Fallout 76, but in Fallout as a whole. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was definitely a fun one and a very nice break from discussing the morality and stuff of the other factions. If you want to discuss more, why not join our Discord? We have a lot of fun discussing games, hardware, TV shows, movies, music, and more. We'd love to have you. Thanks for watching. Remember to tell your mom you love her. 6 is out.